Professor Yagi, thank you very much for agreeing to be a featured speaker at the 4th Asian Business and Management Conference.
It's my pleasure.
You will talk today on a subject which is interesting, wide-ranging and quite controversial. When problem solvers never solve the problem. Can you give us a brief synopsis of what you'll be talking about?
Yes, my basic hypothesis is that many organizations, and particularly large organizations, make a mistake when faced with a problem, and that is they assign the problem to somebody who either finds out sooner or later that discussing the problem or analyzing the problem or talking about the problem is sufficient to continue the work on the problem. And instead of being given incentives for the problem resolution or penalties for failing to solve the problem, people and increasingly large organizations find out that it's actually more lucrative or profitable or advantageous for them to continue to talk about the problem rather than actually solve it. And so the focus of my talk is how this situation develops and how organizations can prevent that from happening, or what they should do if they find themselves in that situation.
You've had a career which has spanned, in fact, a number of different professions. Can you briefly talk us through your interesting career?
Well, I was born in Oregon in the United States. I was raised in Iowa in a rather rural agricultural environment. It was a small college town. My father was a university professor, and so I grew up in an academic environment, watching students and graduate students and talking with other professors even sometimes. I went to university in California, at the University of California at Berkeley. I started by studying physics, but I changed my major to Japanese when after I took a Japanese course by mistake and realized that I really enjoyed it. After graduating from college, I was on active duty in the U.S. Navy for 5 years. I was a naval aviator. And after flying jets for a few years, I transferred to the reserves and came to Japan to study business administration. And I went to the Keio University Business School, graduated from there in 1990. I then worked in the auto industry in Detroit for 3 years, and then I joined the U.S. Foreign Service. I was a commercial officer working for the U.S. Department of Commerce, and I worked for 7 years at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, followed by 4 years in Egypt, and then 3 years in Kenya. And my last assignment was 4 years at the American consulate in Nagoya, where I was the consul for commercial affairs. And I retired from the military about 10 years ago after a total of 20 years of active and reserve service. And then I retired from the Foreign Service 3 years ago to take my current position at the Nanzan Business School.
How have you found the shifts then from the naval career to the diplomatic career to the academic sort of way of life? And I say this as an academic myself, but we associate the military career and the diplomatic career very much with following orders and prescribed lines that are set out by superiors. In other words, you have very little control over what you're doing.
That's true.
You fit very neatly into something, as opposed to being an academic where you have the ability to think, to express your own opinions, but often that you don't actually, conversely, get to be where the action is. You're no longer a part of it. How have you found that transition?
That's a very interesting question. A part of the answer to that is to explain that even though I was a career Foreign Service officer for the United States, there are different kinds of Foreign Service officers. And I was not an employee of the State Department, but rather the Department of Commerce. The U.S. Department of Commerce has a small foreign service component, and our job is to help U.S. Companies do business successfully globally. And so, in a sense, my job as a diplomat was a little bit different, perhaps from the standard idea that most people have in their minds of what a diplomat does. I actually spent most of my 18 years dealing with companies and helping them solve real-world problems, to the extent that all people in that kind of job, obviously, it's a very restrictive life in some respects. But in a way, my military service really prepared me brilliantly for that, because in the military you learn when to speak up, you learn when to not speak up, you learn how to respect a person, for example, by their position rather than themselves as an individual. And so many of the complicated and difficult situations that I faced when I was in the diplomatic corps, I was actually well prepared for that by my military experience. Having had all of the different experiences I had in the military and in the foreign service, at this point in my career, what I wanted to do more than anything else was to pass on the lessons that I had learned to a new generation, or many generations of other people. I was able to see lots of different things, work with lots of different companies, live in many different countries, and so I have a lot of experience seeing what works well, either in a government or non-government or private sector situation, what doesn't work well. And so I want to take all those experiences, and rather than simply carry them with me quietly into retirement, I wanted to spend at least a couple of years transferring some of this information, experience, and perhaps lessons learned to others.
The recent appointment of Carolyn Kennedy as ambassador to Tokyo is a very high-profile appointment. Do you believe that this appointment reflects a shift in the weight that the United States is giving to Tokyo?
Certainly, I think that I think that it's a little bit misleading to think that the shift from Japan ever left completely. The short answer to the question of importance is that both Japan and China are extremely important.
Do you accept my comment at all, though, that Japan fell down the list of priorities, or was seen as less important?
I think that the last 20 years, the explosive growth that we've witnessed in China certainly couldn't help but take some of the spotlight away from Japan. Absolutely. So even though Japan's importance really hasn't faded as much as it may appear, the remarkable growth in China was simply too obvious to ignore.
As a diplomat serving in Japan, you've seen many of the quirks, if you like, of the Japanese systems, Japanese businesses in place. Mm-hmm. However, I was wondering if you could perhaps illuminate us on some of the things that you think Japan does well.
Oh, yes, absolutely. When Ezra Vogel's book, Japan is Number One, came out, it made a very, very great impression on me. I think I was either in college or just recently graduated. And a lot of people have misunderstood Vogel's point. It's very important to remember that he never titled his book Japan is Number One. He entitled his book Japan as Number One. It was meant to be an allegory or a metaphor for examining many of the things that Japan does, in which serves as a remarkable example for others to follow. One of the things that I really admire and respect about Japan in general is a very strong sense that, for lack of a better phrase, everybody's in the same boat, or everybody's in one boat, and that it's a large number of people crowded into a relatively small amount of territory, and that nobody can afford to be too greedy or too inconsiderate of others, and that rivalry is fine and competition is fine, but at the end of the day, everybody is very much in the same boat, and that you need to be good neighbors. And now we realize, with the growth of the global economy, that the whole world is basically in that situation. We are all a large number of people in one very small boat, and we have to take care of the boat, and we have to take better care of each other.
Professor Yagi, thank you very much.